So, we are working through the book of Proverbs, and we had 8 lessons. We looked at some introduction, some passages, and then we've been looking at some topics. And today we'll talk about politics a little bit. Try not to get too controversial on that. I don't know if I could be as controversial on that as I was last week, but. And then next week, Lord willing, we'll talk about a theology of the Proverbs. And again, theology is looking at the book and seeing what it teaches us about God himself. And so that's what we will look at next week. And that concludes our lessons on Proverbs. The week after is Easter Sunday, so we do not have Sunday school that Sunday. And then in April, we will start a next section, which is actually looking at the catechism section on God, who God is. So we'll have 8 lessons, we'll have some lessons. I'm not sure how many yet on that. All right, so by way of reminder, wisdom teaching assumes that God has created the universe with an all-pervading plan and order, that when we live in accordance with it, we live with wisdom. When we try to fight against the way God has created it, then we are foolish. And we said wisdom is skill in godly living, and wisdom is making the right choice. And so we found that, again, in the book of Proverbs, we're always faced with a choice. And wisdom is knowing what's the right choice to make given the situation. And again, sometimes that's between better and best, sometimes that's between good and bad. And so even when we look at politics, we keep in mind, in the back of our minds, the question of what is the choice here that I should be making. So that's how we look at it. Now politics, I have to admit, so I hadn't done a study of politics in Proverbs before, so this was what we call new preparation. And I was pulling material in from all kinds of places, and then I had to try to focus it down into one Sunday school lesson. So I just chose one piece. But the book of Proverbs has a lot to say about politics, but it does it in kind of a different context than what we're in today. But I think we can apply it to our situation in life today here in the United States, nearly 3,000 years later. So here's the question that I want to ask. Given that we live in a country that allows us to elect those who rule over us, so we don't have a king, we have officials that we've elected and said, you please rule over us. So we have some say in the matter, unless you live in the state of Illinois, we have some say in the matter and as to who is going to be a ruler over us. And it might be the president, it could be a representative, it could be a governor, it could be a city or township official. I don't know that we elect our township board or anything like that, but we can go over to our neighbor's house and vote, we've been told, on township matters. So, but anyway, anytime we're electing someone over us, that would be ruling over us. What does Proverbs say? And it says a lot, actually, quite a bit. Now, I don't normally cite all my sources because a lot of times I'm pulling from information that I learned a long time ago and I don't know who to cite anymore. But I'm going to give you 2 in particular people. Kevin Bowder wrote an essay called Let Me Tell You How to Vote back in 2012. And it's a short essay, his Nick of Time article, if you're familiar with those. And I'm borrowing quite a bit from him, from that essay. And Bruce Waltke is, I don't believe he's alive anymore, but he was an excellent Old Testament scholar. And if you were to say, what is the one main commentary that everybody should own. Well, Waltke has a 2-volume commentary. I don't know how many pages together. It's probably at least 1,000 pages on the book of Proverbs. He translated the book of Proverbs in the New International Version translation back in the 70s. He was very brilliant. I actually thought about going to study under him for my master's after my MDiv, because I thought, well, I could sit at Central and read everything he wrote, or maybe I should just go study under him. But the school he was teaching at the time didn't have a PhD program, so we'd have to uproot our family for 2 years and then uproot them again, and I didn't think that was necessary. I hope that's okay. So anyway, I'm borrowing a lot from him as well. So here are some introductory thoughts as we talk about politics, because obviously politics is much more broad topic than what we can cover in Proverbs. There's the issue of what is the Christian's role in America today. There's a lot going on in our nation today about this question. So here are a few kind of caveats or thoughts, or maybe thoughts is the right word, as we take a look, as we think about politics in general. The church's role, so that is, we can say the role of First Baptist Church of Marshall is to proclaim the whole counsel of God, to proclaim the gospel and the whole counsel of God. That's our duty. Okay, so our duty as a church is not to be involved in politics. The church as itself, as Christ has given it what it's supposed to do, it's supposed to do what it's supposed to do, teaching people to observe what Christ has taught, baptizing them, preaching the gospel, teaching the whole counsel of God, 2 Timothy, perpetuating the faith from one generation to another, 2 Timothy 2:2. Our ministry is a spiritual ministry. And it doesn't matter if you're in this country, if you are in Thailand or Burma or India or Israel or Romania, the church's mission is the same. It doesn't matter when you live or where you live, the church's mission doesn't change. So the church itself is not a political entity. And here I could say something controversial. But I'll just state it this way, in a non-controversial way. It's because of this that some churches don't put government flags in the auditorium. They might put them somewhere else, but they don't put them here. Churches should not tell people who to vote for, but they should tell them how to vote. That's what we're doing today. I'm going to tell you how to vote. In other words, this is a wisdom question. How do I know who to vote for in an election? I have to make a discernment. I have to make judgments. How do I make those judgments? What questions do I need to ask as a Christian? Again, it's outside the purview of a church, but for me as a Christian, as an individual, I do have a role in government. The Bible was written when democracy, or in the United States, we have a representative republic, did not exist. Okay, we don't have a pure democracy. But these things didn't exist. A king was appointed over you, and this was true everywhere in the world. It was no different for Israel. Once Saul came along, and God always appointed, or God was supposed to be the one who appointed the kings over Israel. So it's a little bit different because there isn't quote-unquote democracy in the Bible. But having said that, again, we elect those people, or well, I'll get to this point I think in a minute, but the book of Proverbs was written by kings, but it's for the common person to read and learn from. So there is an understanding, both in the Old Testament law, Deuteronomy 14, I think it is. It's either chapter 14 or chapter 17 of Deuteronomy, talks about the king. even though Israel didn't have a king back then. There is, even though that there is a king, there's always a sense in Israel, in the writings of the Old Testament, that the people, the common people like us, should know the difference between a good king and a bad king. We may not be under the power of setting up a king or taking down a king, but it's always expected that we can look at a king and know whether or not the king's doing what he's supposed to do. The law was above the king in the Old Testament, and his performance could be evaluated accordingly. Okay, and then this is just a final thought. Do not sacrifice the good on the altar of the perfect. So I was listening to a number of podcasts, because this is an election year. There's a lot of Christian podcasts who are talking about voting and the church and Christians, what Christians should do and what we're after. And someone made this point, and I thought it was worth mentioning. If we look for say the perfect ideal presidential candidate, that meets all of our qualifications that we see in the book of Proverbs, then we'll never vote, because we'll never find a perfect candidate. So there's kind of another set of judgments or another set of discernments that we have to have. We're never going to find the perfect one till Christ comes back, then we don't have to vote. We'll never find the perfect one until Christ comes back. So there are some weights, some measures, some things we have to think about when we are looking at our imperfect candidates, to say, how do we know which one to vote for? Which one can we vote for? Is there something that disqualifies someone out of hand from us voting for that person? So there's still some more questions that we have to ask, but I don't think that because there's no perfect person to vote for, that we end up necessarily in a place where there's no one to vote for. I mean, it could get that bad someday, but. All right, here's a definition of politics. This actually comes from Walke. Politics involves the debate or conflict among individuals or parties, we have the Republican, Democratic, Independent, with different views of ethics and morality. So there's, different groups. We in here are probably pretty close to having the same view of ethics and morality, but you can go not very far into town and you'll find other groups that have different views of ethics and morality. And politics involves the debate or conflict among those groups having or hoping to achieve power in government over those with other views of ethics and morality. So, and not to speak one way or the other, but the Democratic Party in Minnesota, 2 years ago when they took over House, Senate, and governor, decided that they were going to use that power to force their view of morality and ethics on the rest of the state. Okay, and they did it strong. And now I say they got so much done last year that they're kind of bored this year, so they're just looking for things to do now. But that's exactly what they did. They stopped playing Minnesota nice. And they just said, nope, we've got power, we're gonna do this. And we see similar things in the Biden administration. And I was going to talk about this statement, we cannot legislate morality. And I have a really interesting quote, actually by Martin Luther King Jr. about this. And I'm not going to take time to go into it. But let's just say that, just briefly, sometimes we use this phrase, you can't legislate morality, and it can mean one of two things. One, it means that, well, if you pass a law, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not murder, like we have, it won't stop people from murdering, which is true. We still have murder, even though so you can write a law on a piece of paper, it's not going to change people's behavior. People will still break that law. What it does do is it can act as a deterrent, that to keep them from doing it. And so you can still, in a way, you can pass laws on moral issues. That is actually a good thing. But don't necessarily, you're not changing someone's behavior just because you wrote a bill. All right, so political leaders. So I decided on this, Proverbs and political leaders. This is on your notes. And what I'd like to do is, we'll just kind of go through these. This is, 10, I think I said in your notes, 10 characteristics of a good leader, or something to that effect. So when we're looking at the book of Proverbs, and when we're looking at thinking about political leaders, and we're examining our political leaders, I was even thinking you could almost make a chart from this, which I didn't think about in time. I'm going to give you 10. There's probably more, but we'll go through 10, where you could actually say, okay, here's the characteristics Proverbs says makes a good leader. Here are the people that are my options to vote on, and then grade them. Just check off the box. If they pass that one, check it off. And hopefully you find someone that has 2 or 3. In some places we do. In places like conservative outstate Minnesota, sometimes you do find people that meet more of these. The first one, so we'll be kind of hopping around in Proverbs. I'm going to hang myself on something. I have too many cords around my neck. All right. Sorry about that. All right, so the first one is a political leader should be themselves wise. Okay, so being a political leader, wisdom itself should be inseparable from the leader's character. Proverbs 28 verse 5 says that evil men do not understand justice, but those who seek the Lord understand it completely. So evil men do not understand justice. One of the things that you're looking for in a political leader is someone who has wisdom themselves. They understand what is right and what is wrong. They have good character. They are not evil in and of themselves. So you would hope that you would have someone who has individual integrity. For a person, okay, settle on one thought here. A person put it this way. Okay, I'll change it. One of the qualifications of a pastor is that a pastor has his home in good order. Financially, his children. And Paul makes a specific point to say if a man can't keep his own house in order, how can he keep the house of God in order? Well, the similar principle here. If you have a ruler who's evil, or is unable to keep their own house in order, so to speak, how are they going to rule over the entire nation? So we're looking for someone who's not evil, is not an evil person, and understands wisdom or seeks wisdom. Second one is that they are righteous. And this is Proverbs 16, verse 12. Yep. And actually, and I don't think I'll have time to talk about it, but Proverbs 16, 1 through 15 is an entire section about rulers. The first 9 verses talks about God as sovereign over the universe. 10 through 15 actually talks about the king. So this whole section is about kings. But in verse 12 in particular, it says, "It is an abomination to kings to do evil, for the throne is established by righteousness." So this is similar to the first one. The first one talked about their character. They're not an evil person. they're a person who themselves are wise. The second one is that it's an abomination of kings to do wickedness. So these are, again, they have a personal righteousness. They have a kind of an upstanding morality or character to themselves. Now, a lot of these, by the way, if I can maybe make a timeout, you really have to be careful where you get your information. This is free. Because you have to answer this question. Let's say that you make a chart, you put the candidates at the top, and you start checking things off. How do you know that that person is an evil person? How do you know if that person seeks after, is righteous or upright morality? How do you know that, right? You have to answer that question. If you watch cable news, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, anything that would be called cable news, you're probably not getting the full picture of who that person is. You have to find other sources, and there are some other sources now with the internet. There's more independent news sources. So in Minnesota, for example, we have Bring Me the News is a Minnesota news source. It's online. We also have Alpha News, which is an independent source, that's a news source that's online, that is it's a little more objective than Bring Me the News. Bring Me the News is okay. The worst thing about Alpha News is I don't like their website. Their website looks really cheap. But their news articles and the people who write the news articles, it's a little bit better. It's a little bit fairer than some other news sources. The Marshall paper, actually Marshall Independent, doesn't seem too slanted from what I've read. But anyway, you have to really understand the sources that you're going to be looking at to gauge this kind of stuff. All right, so anyway, that was free. Inseparable from character, righteous themselves. Thomas Jefferson said that now Thomas Jefferson was an idealist. Okay, speaking of newspapers, he's the one who started it, right? A politician looks forward, he says, Thomas Jefferson says, a politician looks forward only to the next election, which is getting worse and worse, right? Someone gets elected into office and the next day, what do? Start campaigning for the next election. Drives me nuts. All right, he says, a politician looks forward only to the next election. A statesman looks forward to the next generation. Okay, so looking much farther than just getting himself reelected. What is it going to take for me to get reelected? That's what the vast majority of our politicians ask themselves every day. You're looking for someone who's not thinking of their own well-being, but looking beyond that. Which goes to this one. Standing for principle instead of being pragmatic. Proverbs 29:7 says, the righteous knows court decisions for the poor. I'm reading from a different translation. But the wicked does not understand knowing them. So 29:7 is talking about a courtroom situation. 29:7. A righteous man knows the rights of the poor. Yeah, that's a better translation there. So a righteous man knows the rights of the poor. So the poor person can't defend themselves, and they can't pay you back for standing up for them. But a righteous person stands up for them anyway because it's the right thing to do. Or to quote one book, it's the principle of the thing. And so the person does what's right because it's the right thing to do. This was, of course, for those of us who are old enough to remember Barack Obama's presidency, something that Barack Obama was known for not doing. He was very much of trying to just please people in the decisions he made. Number 4, they rule by justice and equity. And there's 3 subpoints on this one, justice and equity, because justice and equity show up in the very beginning of the book, if you recall, chapter 1, I think it's verse 4 or verse 3 in the introduction to the book. Verse 3, to receive instruction in wise dealing, righteousness, justice, and equity. Okay, those 3 words. And we talked about those a couple months ago when we started. And they're really kind of the key point of the book. Now, I just grocery listed all of the verses up here, but I broke them down in your notes. That there's 3 main areas. So they rule by justice, which is doing what's right. In chapter 17, verse 15, acquitting the guilty and condemning the innocent is an abomination to the Lord. So you're getting those backwards. In other words, if someone is innocent and they're sent to jail anyway, or they're fined anyway, or they're penalized anyway, that is injustice. Letting the guilty go free is injustice. We see a lot of that today. Okay? I don't know if you've heard about, well, my brother lives in Chicago, lives downtown. And after 2020, after the George Floyd riots, the police used to regularly drive by his house down his street to patrol. They don't anymore. And then he would go to these meetings, neighborhood meetings, where the police would be there, and he would say, "Why don't you drive down our street anymore?" And they said, "We're just not going to drive down your street anymore." And he says, "Well, that's not good, because bad things are going to happen then. We're getting more, bad behavior." Well, then he was robbed, and he had the evidence. So he calls 911 because someone broke into their apartment. It's a condo complex. Someone broke into all the mailboxes and was stealing all the mail out of the mailboxes. He was watching her do it on video on the security system. He calls 911 and they said, "Don't call 911, this isn't an emergency. If you would like, we can send out a police officer tomorrow and you can file a report." He's like, "But she's here. Like, I'm watching her do it." "Sorry, we'll send someone out tomorrow and you can file a report." Or actually, she said, "Call the other number, the non-emergency line, and have someone come out." Why? Why don't the police care? Because Chicago isn't going to prosecute this person for this theft. They acquit the guilty, and that's injustice. Number 2, a politician should not be able to be bribed. I don't know if there's any easy way to say that. They're imbribable. I wanted to say that. 19 verse 6 says, "Many seek the favor of a nobleman, and the generous person has everyone for a companion." In other words, the one who has money has friends. That's a common theme in Proverbs. What chapter am I in? Verse 6 of I don't have the chapter, I just have the verse. "Many curry favor with a ruler, and everyone is the friend of one who gives gifts." So, in other words, talking about people who buy the politicians off to get what they want. So a good politician does not accept bribes. And then thirdly, they defend the poor, which we talked about before. Proverbs 22, verses 22 through 23. Do not exploit the poor because they are poor, and do not crush the needy in court. For the Lord will take up their case and will exact life for life. And then in chapter 24, verse 23, to show partiality in judgment is not good. He who says to the wicked, you are righteous, is bad. But to those who rebuke the wicked will be delight, and good blessing will come upon them. So again, these are, they are fair in their judgment. And they treat everyone the same. They don't treat one group of people special, and we look especially at how they treat the poor. Which is, there's a lot of questions about that, but skip over that. We're going fast. Okay. They should be kind and gracious. Okay, so Proverbs 20, verse 28. Kindness and reliability guard the king. He upholds his throne with kindness. So it would be nice to have a politician who's not just kind and gracious because he thinks you'll give him money, or give her money, but they're kind and gracious all the time. They're just they're a nice person. Okay, and if you do watch cable news, you can find out pretty quickly who the kind and gracious ones are and who the ones who aren't kind and gracious are by the way they behave with other people on the television. You get a sense of their attitude pretty quickly. I don't know if that's an advantage of social media or not, but number 6, a wise ruler surrounds himself with good advisors. Proverbs 15:22 is kind of the key verse on this one. Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors, each one succeeds. And the idea here is, this is a general principle that applies to us as well. When you think that you've got all the answers, it's good to ask other people what they think about all your answers. Because chances are you've missed something, and they will see something that you didn't see. So it's always good to have a multitude of counselors when you're doing that. So one of the questions here is, who are their advisors? Who are they surrounding themselves with? Now, I don't know how you think about Trump, but this was one of the things that Trump did well in 2016, is he wasn't a career politician. So he had to surround himself with good advisors. Now, he probably fired most of them at some point along the way, but it was something that he did, and to help, because he knew he had gaps in his political knowledge. So he had to have that to be successful. Whatever you think of him, that was one of the things he did, at least back then, 2016. All right, a good politician dissociates himself from the wicked. In other words, he separates himself from the wicked. It's not just enough that he is not wicked,